Welcome, everyone. I want to start just by saying how thrilled I am to be here and with you all in person. It's been a long 2 years, and we've been working on this for almost that entire time, and I'm just really grateful to have all of you here in person with us to celebrate the work that we do and the work that we do to inspire each other. So thank you. So welcome to the opening conversation and reception for the Highline Network Forward Spaces Symposium. And a special welcome for our friends that are joining via live stream. We're actually streaming this one via Next City, and we wish that all of you could be here in person with us on this beautiful warm evening here in Miami. My name is Asima Jansveld, and I lead the Highline Network, which I consider the primary learning community for nonprofit leaders that are reusing infrastructure as open space across North America. And most of you are friends here. You're familiar with what we do, but for those of you that might be new to the work that we do, the Highline Network is a program of the Highline in New York City, which is in itself an infrastructure reuse project. It was it opened about 12 years ago, and it is a beautiful public park on an elevated rail line on the west side of Manhattan in New York City. When the Highline opened, our founders got lots of questions about how did you make this happen? How did you get the community to agree? How did you raise the money? How did you create your partnerships? And our co-founder and the executive director, Robert Hammond, in 2016 thought maybe it was worth solidifying an actual peer learning community to share the successes of the Highline, but also really to delve into the lessons learned, what we might have done differently if we had hindsight, and to help support the projects that are doing this work in their own community to learn from those lessons and build on that for their own work. And a lot of those lessons have to do with value capture. They have to do with the fact that these quality public spaces are creating tremendous value to their cities. And how do we best capture that value? To support the long-standing residents and businesses of the communities. So that's why the network began, and why we work to support a really fantastic group of leaders, most of who are here today on a daily basis. But today is actually, we have all stages of park development, but today is more than just the network. We're bringing together a larger group of the infrastructure reuse field. At our last count, we have 60 infrastructure reuse projects that will be attending the symposium over the next 2 days, representing 40 cities. So we're really excited to have all of you here. I'm really thankful to each and every one of you for taking the time to be here, to learn, to be inspired, and to collaborate with the people in the room here today, in the open space today. But I want to make a special thank you to our partners that have supported the network, and sometimes from the start, both financially and strategically. I see some of them here today. We have the JPB Foundation, Knight Foundation based here in Miami, TD Bank, and the Miami Development Downtown Authority. So thank you to all of them. This wouldn't be possible without their support. So our members and the larger field, many of you are constantly thinking about how we build our city's future. But we also like to remind everyone that it's also about taking a look at our past and thinking about the larger forces that have been rooted well before any of us started work in our communities. And with that, it's really about the historic decisions that have been made to shape the infrastructure in our communities. And it's what we call infrastructural racism. So for all of you that are getting a bag, tomorrow you'll see that the network released a publication earlier this year called the Community First Toolkit, where we delve into this concept a little bit more. But in short, we really consider infrastructural racism as being the laws, regulations, the institutes that have produced, condoned, or perpetuated widespread unfair treatment and oppression of people of color in the built environment and in our neighborhoods. And basically, every time you take a step on a sidewalk, you cross a bridge, you go into a public space, there is an infrastructural policy decision that was made to place that in the public realm. And it shows us the power we have to shape our public realm through the policy decisions that are made and the way we invest our dollars. And this is, of course, part of the pivotal question that brings the network together, and I'm assuming spurs most of your work. It's how do we show that we're making a difference in countering generations-long impacts on our urban landscapes and building community trust. So before I turn it over to our keynote and to our panel, I just, of course, have to take a minute to recognize why we are in Miami today. We are here to celebrate, in part, the work of our local network member, The Underline. I know Meg and Patrice is here, and a few others. They celebrated their opening last year, and they've already brought tremendous value to the Brickell community in their first phase. They've added 30,000 new native plants and trees, launched 18 new businesses, and they've held over 110 public events with the 1.6 million residents and visitors that have come through their space in the last year. And I like to highlight those facts because you can see they're cross-cutting. It's not just about the economic or just about the social or about the environmental. It's about bringing all of those together and what a public space potential can be for that. But it's also about partnerships. The Underline can't do this work on their own. And that will bring us to the fantastic panel that we will be having later today. But first, we're tremendously honored to have the U.S. Department of Transportation Assistant Secretary for Transportation Policy with us today, Christopher Coase, and I'd like to welcome him to the stage to give a few welcome remarks before the panel.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Miami. Oh, come on. So I grew up in a Baptist church in South Georgia. Good evening, Miami. Listen, I just got off the plane, got into a cab, and came straight here. And I'm just telling you how excited I am to be with all of you today and also see some familiar faces and friends. But more importantly, I just wanted to thank not only Next City, but the Urban Line for hosting me today. Today's conversation, as I was on the plane coming in, going through a little turbulence before we landed, I asked myself, what would this group of cross-sectional, comprehensive thinkers who are literally trying to repurpose the built environment to be more sustainable, more economically prosperous, and more equitable and resilient? And I thought to myself, I probably shouldn't read this 10-page speech that the staff have prepared for me. So if you allow me, I'm going to do what we call an audible and actually hope that I will spend more time with my panelists and answering some of the questions that I think many of you are wrestling with right now in your communities. But with that, again, I am so excited to be here because we're at a precipice of a once-in-a-generational moment for us to think comprehensively, to open doors and tables to communities and individuals who have been long outside looking in on how we design our communities for all. And right now, the president, as you know, signed the bipartisan infrastructure law almost a year ago. And just to put this in context, this $1.2 trillion infrastructure package, $650 billion of those investments come through the Department of Transportation. And I can tell you, as an Assistant Secretary for Policy, I have a unique position to see how we're trying to implement these dollars. And I have some good news for you. Because right now, as a department, we are delivering real results to make a better America. As you know, for decades, policymakers have celebrated Infrastructure Week without ever delivering. But the president got it done, and now, under the leadership of Secretary Buttigieg, we're actually delivering projects that are changing people, changing communities' lives for the better. And particularly, we're doing it in a way that recognizes that transportation is not just an infrastructure category. It is a pathway to reconnect communities that have long been historically forgotten or have received the brunt of some of the environmental justice harms. In addition, we are doing this in a way that how do we make sure we're creating not just good paying jobs, but wealth creating opportunities for all Americans? How are we actually using these investments to create not only resilient communities, but actually address the climate crisis today? And more importantly, as you know, as I was just with the mayor a couple weeks ago, the value of making sure that this country has a global competitiveness by strengthening our own supply chains. Friends, the Department of Transportation on day one, many like our other sister agencies, got on the ground running, particularly when it came to bringing transportation, land use, and community as part of our framework. For the first time, as part of our 5-year strategic plan, we made equity a core priority for the first time in the Department of Transportation history. And because of that, you've seen the Department of Transportation take some very aggressive steps to make sure that equity is in everything we do, from leveraging our Title VI authorities, where you see that in I-45 in Houston, or providing more pathways for wealth creating opportunities for small disadvantaged business within the Department of Transportation. And I'm just really excited to say that in previous years, the Department of Transportation had roughly given about 18% of our resources to underserved Black and brown businesses. And I am pleased to say that we've actually exceeded that to 21%. And that is going to show where we are heading in years to come. Again, equity is a priority for this administration, but one of the things I also must note, that when we talk about how do we remake the built environment so that it's more prosperous, more equitable, more resilient for all, we have to, from our perspective, recognize that our North Star is that we have to prioritize safety. And unfortunately, as has been recently discussed, over 40,000 individuals, even during COVID, when people were at home, 40,000 individuals died on our roadways. And predominantly, that was Black and brown communities, rural and tribal. The challenge we have today, as we think about how we reimagine our communities, we have to have safety at the forefront. Because if you're not safe to walk while Black, drive, or in some cases bike, we are not creating a built environment that will be successful and resilient for the long run. Now, at the Department of Transportation, we're using, again, all the tools in our toolkit. But one of the things I'll highlight here is that, again, it's the proof in the pudding. By taking these necessary steps of aligning transportation, land use, economic prosperity as a policy framework, when you look at our recent FY22 raise dollars, we begin to see that local communities who have long been saying we need investments to retrofit our communities, we announced over 166 raise grants, one in every state, totaling $2.24 billion. Now, normally people will give me applause on because they say that's a lot of money, but I know you guys are really smart and you want to go into the details. Approximately 70% of those dollars went to areas of persistent poverty who oftentimes have not actually applied to a department grant. In addition to that, we are taking some of our historical highway freight programs like infra, and we're actually in communities to reimagine how we create more multimodal freight. And we're asking ourselves, how do we redesign our freight corridors? Where just recently we announced $105 million to the state of Michigan to retrofit I-375 freeway to make a more reconnected community to the disadvantaged Black community that's adjacent. My friends, in closing, we at the Department of Transportation recognize that it's not enough just to have $650 billion plus the new investments that we're seeing as part of the Inflation Reduction Act to actually remake communities. For too long, the federal government has not actually invited community, local government to the table. And that is why I'm so excited that this past week, we announced, along with the Department of Housing and Urban Development, a new Thriving Communities Initiative, which is going to create a new federal community partnership. We recognize that if we want to make sure this historic investment truly allows us to reimagine our communities, we have to roll up our sleeves as the federal government and actually meet community where they are. And so right now we're putting $30 million out to provide capacity to local governments in partnership with local community groups, churches, private sector, so they can bring to us the best, most transformative projects. And I'm going to tell you, this initiative, while it's right now with Department of Transportation and HUD, this is going to be one that will be expanding to other agencies as well. So I'll just say to all of you, get ready and make sure you are forming your partnerships so you can be a part of our new Thriving Communities Network. Last but not least, There are so many new opportunities for all of you to think about how you too can reconnect your communities. As I was just signing with the mayor, we have a Reconnecting Communities NOFO, which is $1 billion to actually allow local governments with nonprofits, with the private sector, really create a comprehensive whole of community approach of how we retrofit and actually undo the harm, but actually put communities of opportunity on the precipice. That application deadline is coming up in probably like 36 hours, so please apply. But more importantly, Reconnecting Communities is not a program at the Department of Transportation. It is our principle. And so whether it's our Reconnecting Communities program, if it's our Safe Streets for All program, $5 billion dedicated to removing roadway deaths, or the fact that we have a new smart city for communities who are really leaning in on technology, addressing some of the challenges that I discussed earlier. Now is the time for you guys to be bold in your thinking, stretch arms in your outreach, but more importantly, now is the time to get the job done. So with that, I welcome you all for the opportunity to have a conversation, but more importantly, let's do this work together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a perfect segue into our conversation because it's all about partnerships. It's all about partnerships. We don't do this work alone. We can't. The work of embedding equity requires those shaping our public realm to think beyond our own individual budgets and our own individual spaces and creating partnerships to build better impact. We need public partners. We need our cities, our states, our federal partners to build policies and invest in our infrastructure. We need financial partners that see the potential and value of investing in areas and people that haven't always had access to define the outcomes for their communities. And we need private partners, the ones that are guiding our real estate development in our cities, and to have them stand by the same ideals. So very, very pleased to have them all represented on our panel conversation today. And I will now welcome everyone else to the stage. And Assistant Secretary, you can take a seat as you in one of your seats. So I'll first welcome Oscar Perry-Abello. Oscar is the Senior Economics Justice Correspondent for Next City, and he'll be serving as the moderator this evening. We're also very honored to have Mayor Daniela Levine Cava with us from Miami-Dade County. Thank you, Mayor, for joining us. We also have Terry Williams, the President and COO of One United Bank, the largest Black-owned bank in the United States. And David Martin, representing two roles. He is the CEO of Terra, a South Florida-based real estate development company, but he also serves on the board of the Underline, so we'll delve into that as well. Welcome, everyone. You may have a seat, and I will turn it over to Oscar.
Thank you. Thank you, Asima. Thank you to the Highline Network for inviting me to moderate this panel. Really excited. You know, at Next City, we're also very much about cross-sectoral stories and partnerships, and so I'm really excited to have the federal government here, local government here. Won't talk about the state government right now. We have a bank here, a financer here, and we also have a developer here who's sort of having two hats here as a developer, but also being on the board of a nonprofit, the Underline here in Miami. So really excited. And thank you, Christopher, for your secretary, Mr. Assistant Secretary, for teeing up the conversation, because I think everyone here is very much excited about many of the things that the changes that are coming to the way that the Department of Transportation is giving out dollars, handing out dollars, is encouraging and establishing new kinds of partnerships that really haven't been funded in this way before. And we're going to talk about that. But you know, before I jump into it, let me take the moderator's prerogative and just do a little framing here. You know, as a journalist, I got to start with a story and a grounding and a place. So let me ask. I'm also personally, this is my first time in Florida, my first time in Miami. Is this anyone else's first time in Miami or Florida? A lot of folks, yeah. So when I saw that there was a tour earlier today of Overtown, the historically black neighborhood of Miami, actually it was Overtown, it was Colortown before there was a Miami, right? There was a black settlement there before the city of Miami was incorporated, and I wanted to go on that tour and get a sense of what that neighborhood has gone through. It's been through a lot, right? Some of you know the history. I'll touch on it very briefly. But, the thing is, so Overtown, prior to the I-95 highway interchange being constructed through there, Overtown had 40,000 black residents. After the highways were, using eminent domain and slum clearance and, all those sorts of tactics we're all familiar with now, Overtown was left with 8,000 black residents. 40,000 to 8,000, right? So when we went out there today, and we saw some of the newer infrastructure projects that we're going to talk a little bit about, the word I took away from the conversations we had out there, the takeaway word for me was tired. Folks are tired. They're tired of coming to meetings, not being taken seriously, not being heard, not being just feeling like we heard one resident say they felt like they were a pawn in a Monopoly game that they never agreed to participate in. They're tired. They're tired of working 2 or 3 jobs and then being expected to come to the community meeting at the end of the day. But tired was one takeaway word. The other takeaway word, I might call it dreaming. There are, at the same time, folks are tired about different leaders, different levels of government, not necessarily today, but throughout history, just not listening to them. At the same time, still on 3rd Avenue in Overtown, you have black women-owned businesses taking ownership of new hotels and trying to bring back what was, a really tremendous tradition of Overtown being the place where black artists and other tourists to the city would come and stay because it was the only place they could stay at the time. Now they're creating spaces where folks can choose to stay in that hotel because they appreciate and understand the history and the significance of the location and the neighborhood. So they're dreaming too. And when I asked one Overtown resident, I asked her today, when you hear the word infrastructure, what does it make you think of? And even after this resident had told us and walked us through the painful history of Overtown, she still said that the things, what I think about when I hear the word infrastructure are making sure the space gets taken care of, the ground, the businesses and the people get taken care of. In a sense, it's what hasn't been there all along when it comes to infrastructure. That's what she thought of that's what she thinks of when she hears the word infrastructure today. So I want to start by we're the opening panel. So let's just tell me what does infrastructure mean to you? When you hear the word infrastructure, what do you think of? And I'll give Christopher a break, and we'll go to Terry first. Terry, tell us, what does infrastructure mean to you, and who do you talk about when you talk about infrastructure?
So I would say, can you all hear me? Yeah, I would say today it means hope. I know I'm very hopeful, and when I look out at this audience, I'm very hopeful. Because I do think that infrastructure, 30 years ago was very different than the infrastructure that we're talking about today. I'm very hopeful because as not just president, but owner of the largest black-owned bank in the country, I am sitting between the transportation secretary, not undersecretary, to be secretary, and the mayor of the greatest county in the country. So for those of you that are just coming to Miami, and I know these two individuals are really looking to ensure that the infrastructure projects that are done today are done in an equitable way. And I'm glad that you use that term many times of equitable. So for us, I am, in addition to president of a bank, I'm also on an economic development organization here in Miami. And a lot of the Black business owners came together and said, we need equitable economic development in Miami-Dade County. And what that means is we need the communities to be a part of the process, to be respected. You know, that everyone here comes to projects with a sense of humility, as well as a lack of arrogance. To really talk to the community, because they're the ones on the ground and they can really stop you even from making mistakes. They know the streets, they know the neighborhoods, they know what works, they know what we need. We need not just housing in our communities, we need economic engines, we need businesses, we need to connect to the local economy. In the case of Miami, that's trade and logistics, you know, that's the health and sciences, that's technology. There are all these wonderful businesses that are coming to Miami, are growing in Miami. And I know that the Black community here needs to be connected to those industries in order to not see infrastructure as something that divides us, but something that brings us together. So when I think infrastructure, I think hope today. But I do think that it's going to depend on all of us in this wonderful space to bring that sense of humility, that sense of, you know, listening to the community in order for us to all be successful. So.
All right. Thank you, Jerry. And Danielle, let me go to you next. So where do you see the role of local government in helping to make this happen? You know, how do you acknowledge, let's say, what previous incarnations of government have done in the past, acknowledge that and come into the room, you know, not acting like it's never happened before, but you know, really acknowledging the pain that's there, but trying to work and move forward beyond it. You know, you have an interesting background, I think, in social work.
Law and social work.
Yeah, law and social work. So
a great combination.
Yeah, how do you sort of manage that sort of that tension between, like, look, we know we screwed up in the past, we being government, not you personally, but government, and we're trying to do something different this time around.
Well, thank you very much for coming to our beautiful county. You can see why so many are moving here. I always like to ask how many live here, and then how many wish they lived here, which is always a good collection. And sitting at this hotel rooftop conference area, which I didn't even know existed. That's how it is around here, right? Every time you turn around, there's something new, some new infrastructure. And looking at these buildings and how they've been sort of shoehorned in. And J.W. Marriott, I remember when that was the biggest structure on Brickell, right? And now it's dwarfed by these incredible offices and residences that are just really, it's an amazing, I so admire planners and architects and how they can do these incredible feats. So that to be said, I just want to say Miami-Dade County hosts a huge amount of infrastructure. You came in via the airport. Maybe you've taken a cruise through the seaport. And those two key drivers of our economy are breaking all kinds of all kinds of records. The Miami International Airport is now the largest U.S. airport for foreign travel. The port has increased the cargo phenomenally, and we're still the cruise capital of the world. So those are just some of the infrastructure responsibilities that as county mayor I take on. Little did I ever imagine that I would be in charge of those things. But for me, the people are the most critical infrastructure, and to be in harmony with nature, which it's a little hard to see right here, how we're in harmony with nature. But if you could imagine a sleepy little settlement town, and before that, native peoples. And by the way, it was Indigenous Peoples Day on Monday. So let's say thank you to those who were stewards and still are stewards of our earth and think 7 generations ahead, which we surely don't. But for example, this place was built by dredging. Canals that took out the water, that destroyed the natural bulwark to flooding. We just had a major call with the Army Corps of Engineers today about what's called the Back Bay Study, how we're going to protect this infrastructure from extreme weather, flooding, inundation. You all saw what just happened with Hurricane Ian on the west coast of Florida. So, here we say that the environment is our economy, and we really need to build not only with equity in mind, and so grateful for this administration for making sure there's equity in all things, but also resilience. And I think the fact that those are the key values that are driving our future development certainly resonates for me. And as mayor for less than 2 years, that's my plan, to incorporate equity and resilience into all of our development and try to harmonize with nature and restore some of what we have destroyed in order to be able to house 3 million people right here in Miami-Dade County.
Is it a challenge? How hard is it, or is it hard to make those connections, to have those conversations with folks on the ground? The folks who maybe they're wanting to get jobs connected to some of these new industries or the old industries, the cruise industry.
Well, it's extremely hard.
Yeah.
I'm surrounded by good people who think about these things from an equity lens, from a resilience lens. But this is the place where people went to make a quick buck, and a lot of it was speculation and lies, built on lies. So unfortunately, that spirit is still alive today, and it's really on all of us to be stewards and to safeguard our future and to help look not just the short term, but the long-term horizon. And I do want to say, particularly, you're going to hear from this wonderful man over here, David Martin, and he is one of those who does view development through that lens.
Thank you. Yeah, David, please. So David, tell us a little, what does infrastructure mean to you? And let's say you're wearing your developer hat for the minute. What does infrastructure mean to you? How does the underdeck or the underlying, how do they affect what you do? And how are you thinking today about how not to repeat the mistakes of the past?
I would say that, and thank you for having me here. I would say that infrastructure for me is that built environment, right? And to be built environment, right? And I've studied a lot of neighborhoods. It's kind of like a thing for me and my firm about what the needs and voids are throughout all our neighborhoods, and they're different ones, right? Some neighborhoods do have connectivity, some neighborhoods do have green space, some neighborhoods are safe, and some aren't. And so when we're evaluating what neighborhoods to develop in or what types of projects we want to do, we do a very big audit about what is needed there and how can we hack what capitalism, right? How do we hack that to solve those needs? How do we create green space? How do we create, more wells and a better stormwater management system for our community? How do we look to lead and do solar at a small scale, but at least it's a hope and it's a signal to the community that we want to be better and do better. And so for us in our business, and in our life, you think of my children and what type of, community and society I want them to live in, and all our generations that are to come. our view is that engagement with the neighborhood and the neighbors is very critical early on, and it's a lot of mistakes that are made. We have these, bruises that occur throughout our neighborhoods that, in essence, we lose trust. We lose trust in government. We lose trust in the people. We lose trust in ourselves, in our friends, and it's because we need to have these authentic and more conversations about what is the city we want to see ourselves become. And when we do that, we get more people aligned and really want to follow that vision, and I think can really create a momentum for the right type of development that I think this community and definitely this mayor wants to see. So, I'm just I love the ability to catalyze and be a catalyst for change. The question is, how do we know that change is not always good, right? And so how do we create the characteristics and roadmap for the private sector to really follow those rules and then do the right thing and do the types of projects that we're all talking about? And I think that's key, and it's one of the difficulties, because we'd love to have our mayor for a decade or two, right? But it doesn't happen, and so we have these changes in vision that that occur throughout different administrations, and that impacts our ability to find and come to a consensus and create the enabling legislation like we need, for underline. Why don't we have a TIF structure for the underline, which I'm not saying that we need to. I'm just saying it would be really nice if we would have some tax increment financing districts. So, we have different administrations, very difficult to get these types of policies and procedures and rules and laws and taxing authorities. It takes a long time to get this done, and I think everybody in this tennis court and courtyard knows that. So I'm just honored to be here with everyone on the floor here, and look forward to more dialogue. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, David. Thank you, and I think it's a good transition back to you, Christopher, because David, what you bring up is the challenges of making decisions like should we or shouldn't we have a TIF, or I think you call them CRAs here in Miami, right? Should we or shouldn't we have that for the underline, or in any other example? If we have it, and it's pulling in money. The TIF that covers the Overtown pulled in, I think, like $38 million or $34 million last year. If it's pulling in money, how does that money get spent? What's the process to determine that? And how do you make that process legible and relatable to residents who are going to live in a neighborhood past any single mayoral term, right? And that's really the job of planning and planners, right? That's sort of. We have this whole profession in this country and the world, like urban planners, to establish some kind of plan. I know that the Overtown CRA has a plan that was created and adopted several years ago. But I want to come back to Christopher, because one of the things I was really interested to see as part of the infrastructure spending that the Department of Transportation is doing is this Reconnecting Communities pilot program, where now you're going to have grants from the Department of Transportation going to, or these organizations who have never applied, never been eligible really for these Department of Transportation grants. And the idea is to try to change the planning process to make it more legible and relatable to folks on the ground who are tired of the older ways of doing planning. Can you talk a little bit about the Reconnecting Communities pilot program and how it's different from what's been done before?
Sure. Can you guys hear me? Okay, good. So as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law, we have a moment in time where we have $1 billion for the next 5 years to provide planning grants as well as capital grants to infrastructure projects. Transportation infrastructure. You think about highways, but also think about old railroad lines that went through neighborhoods, as well as other transportation infrastructure, and to give communities the opportunity to reimagine what that could be. So let me do a couple things as I describe this program. Number one, as we announced our NOFO back in June in Birmingham, which if you haven't been to Birmingham, Alabama, it is a picture-perfect example of why reconnecting communities is necessary. You have not only the legacy of the rail system dividing communities, literally where kids, children, K through 12, when the trains come in, they actually can't walk to school because the trains are sitting there for hours. Or ambulances, with someone who may have a heart attack, may not be able to get services. While at the same time, there's a clear legacy of highway infrastructure that dissects the community. I said that to say because while we were in Birmingham, what we also saw was that it was not a conversation just about how can we reimagine the rail lines on a highway. It was actually the fact that there was an existing community, underserved, Black, middle-income, low-income community, who for decades have been saying, one of the ways we can be a part of the future of Birmingham is actually allowing us to be a part of the bus rapid transit line that you're building out. And I think that is powerful because it speaks to that there are conversations that have been happening for years, for decades, of simple solutions, even in the face of built environment barriers where communities said we can actually prosper. That is what the Reconnect Communities pilot is about. Every solution is not going to be a highway takedown or removal of the rail line. It's going to require the community who has that insight working with their local government, because it turns out a nonprofit I haven't seen today build infrastructure on their own, right? So you have to bring the local government as well, in some cases the state as well, which means there's a conversation about the partnerships. And that's one of the things that we're trying to incentivize through our planning grants. Bringing the local government, bringing the community groups, bringing the state when they may not actually have talked to each other for many years, given the resources and given the space to do that. But there's something I want to note also about the Reconnected Communities program. As I mentioned in my remarks, it's $1 billion for 5 years. Some people may say that's not a lot of money to retrofit many communities across the country. And that is why, through the leadership of Secretary Buttigieg, we've taken reconnecting not as a pilot, it is a principle in how we do everything. So I would remind folks, before there was a Reconnecting Communities pilot, in FY21, when we came in the door, we used many of our discretionary grants, particularly RAISE, to give out reconnecting community pilot grants. Whether it was in El Paso, whether it was in Atlanta with the Stitch, so many communities got planning grants. And we're beginning to see the results of that, where, like I said before, in Detroit, Michigan, where they themselves are reimagining 375 and they're prepared to take that down. We know there are other projects across the country. So from our perspective, it's not just the $1 billion, it's not just the $45 billion that the secretary gets to manage, it's actually working with local government, state DOTs who are also getting direct funding and asking them to join us as a department to actually create what I consider is a best practice. How do we center community in our projects so that when we look back 50, 60 years, as someone standing on stage here talking about what we did, they're not saying, oh my gosh, they created more flood-ridden, more divided communities. It's actually the opposite. Never have we been in a moment in time in America where communities are more thriving, more connected, more equitable, and more resilient. And I think that's the moment that we have, not only with reconnecting communities, but as we take this principle to all the funding and the approaches that is required to get this done.
Right. Yeah, and I think there's someone here from Chicago, Anton. I don't know if you're around there in the back somewhere, but so the Englewood Trail in Chicago just got $20 million. This is a 10-year. It's been 10 years of the community talking about this thing on the south side of Chicago, and it was a RAISE grant that is the source of that $20 million. And so it's interesting to see what it will be interesting to see what happens when more of these just planning dollars. We'll wait for the capital dollars later. The planning dollars, if more of those go to grassroots organizations. I mean, I don't know, David or Mayor or Terry, do you have like a dream scenario for like working with grassroots organizations? Do you feel like, oh, if only they had more staff more time to really do the engagement that communities have needed, not just like meetings with charrettes and Post-its and everything, but knocking on doors, calling folks, going where they are, just having those conversations and building the relationships, the drive changes in capital. I mean, Terry, you're a bank. As a black-owned bank, you're very much driven by relationships, and conversations are really what drive your lending decisions. But I don't know. I mean, how often do you get the chance to meet with business owners like you have recently in Miami-Dade County, and last night in Overtown you were meeting with small business owners? How often does that actually happen for you? And what do you think it would be like for you if it was more frequent?
Yeah. The two things that you said that were sort of music to my ears is that you are listening to the community. And I can't say that enough. And in fact, last night, I attended a meeting with local Black-owned businesses in Overtown. And it was held by the Underdeck Committee. I believe the Knight Foundation may have provided funding for the Underdeck to meet with, to do outreach to the community. And so I got to listen, as well as the committee, to what the needs were of the people that have been there for generations. And it was, in fact, very enlightening, because they were saying, you're doing this great project, but the impact of it is going to ripple through to our, where we are currently. The homeless that are currently under the highway, where the underdeck is going to be, are now going to move in front of our businesses. Or you're going to light up the underdeck, but where they're going to move, you have to think about not just the lighting of the underdeck, you have to think about the lighting of the rest of the community, because they're going to move to where there are dark spaces. And it was just really, sort of boots on the ground, really practical things that they were recommending, that if you're up here in these wonderful offices, you may not understand, but it really made a difference, sort of being there and meeting with them. The other thing that you said is public transportation. There is not enough public transportation in the Black communities across the country. Wayne United Bank is here in Miami, but we're also in LA and in Boston. And the same, need for public transportation applies. And the use of infrastructure to meet that needs. It's happening in LA, where the new railroad is going actually right by the bank in Crenshaw. I can't wait for it to open, but it's going to make a big difference in terms of connecting our community, South Central, with other communities in Los Angeles. But here in Miami, we need the same thing. We need more public transportation in Liberty City, in Overtown. And I know that the mayor knows that, but that's another really important connector so that our community can get to jobs and can feel like they're a part. In some cases, as a kid, I used to just get on the bus and just ride, because it really, allowed me to see other communities. And it was a cheap way to do it. So I do think public transportation and listening to the community are two really important things for this.
Well, thank you for that tee up, and for sure listening, community engagement. And, I've always been impressed that the Department of Transportation historically does have a robust public participation program. But I have to say that's my lifeline. I'm really a community organizer. There was another one that got elected president and, worked pretty well for him, right? So we did the largest ever public engagement program in the history of the county, Thrive 305, and we did it with HRNA. I think there's some HRNA folks here today. Okay, you know who you are. We stole one of them, Juan Visser, who came to us after his work with us as a consultant on Thrive 305. But we learned from that all those, really enlightening things, like what a great conversation that you had. And truly, without listening, how will you know? You know, something sounds really great, but it has an unintended consequence. And for transit, which we are a car culture here, and to get people to use transit, it has to be world class. It has to be a better option. Obviously, there are transit dependent people, and they've always been an afterthought. We've really not designed around their needs. But now we have a major new initiative called the Better Bus Network. And by the way, we are getting as much federal money as we can get our hands on. So I feel like I'm out there with my arms wide open and there's a chute. And anything I can do to get that money to come on down here, and we have done very well already with that bipartisan infrastructure bill that I went to see signed in Washington, D.C. So $350 million have already come to our county. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. And we've got more, 350 million more in the pipeline, we hope. But as to this reconnecting community, brilliant, brilliant idea. The underdeck is applying, and the deadline is like, what? Right, it's happening. So the city of Miami partnering with others, that proposal is going in, and we have one for the county on our north corridor, which is similarly a dispossessed, disinvested community. And we've had some visits from some other assistant secretaries who've been pretty enthusiastic about that. So it's one of those future-oriented, how to make sure that when you look back, that you did it right. So we're going to repair the damage that we did, God willing, with this underdeck, and we're going to build for a better, equitable future with the other. Thank you.
Thanks. And David, just to kind of refresh the question, are there examples you can kind of talk about in your work or you've seen around in Miami with the underline of how community organizing, listening, engagement, doing it in different ways has taken your work in different ways?
Yeah, I think definitely ever since I met Meg Daly, it's really inspired me. Meg is the head of the Underline, and really it was her idea to create this amazing 10-mile linear park in our community. And so, there is a religion, I think, about community engagement, which you don't just do a little bit of it. It's either you're all in or you're not, right? And so what happens is a lot of times that community engagement happens after all the planning, or after all the design, or after all the engineering, or just after the permits, or after the construction. And so what ends up happening is there's just these bruises that our communities have because they don't feel they're being listened to. So I think not only is that community engagement the most important, super important, but also when that community engagement starts to happen, which is from idea. I think also a lot of the consulting teams, at the end of the day, not one person or individual does this, right? There's so many different industries, so many different disciplines, and trying to find people that do care about the ultimate product and care about the community and kind of are thinking that way to come up with creative, innovative ideas, I think is also critical. And then I just wanted to clarify one thing. So Underdeck is going through a name change. And there's 3 of the 5 names that are shortlisted actually have Overtown in it. But I don't know the final results yet, but it's ongoing. But I just wanted to mention that for anyone. But thank you so much.
And it's a public vote.
And it's a public vote. That's right. And going back to community engagement real quick, I've done a few public referendums. In the city of Miami Beach, to do any development rights or anything like that, you got to do a public referendum. So you go on you got to go to the elections, and you got to really do the knocking on doors and go into the community meetings and everything. And it's definitely the most, I loved that process. And I think anybody in the private sector that really were to do that and do that early, I think it's just, it brings a whole new meaning to what you do. So, yeah. But anyways, thank you.
Yeah, that's great. You love it now. What did you think before the first time you had to do it? Like,
I was extremely nervous.
Yeah.
And I've made tons of mistakes. And I have, designed projects that were the wrong project and then gone to the community and just had horrible experiences. So I've been doing this for 21 years, but the last 10 years, I really, I'm still learning, but I'm, in every community and every, what's lovely about South Florida is it's, the multiculturalism and the different ideas. It's what makes it Miami. And it's that authenticity about what it is what can make projects special and valuable and successful. So anyways.
Great. All right, we're hitting up against our end here, so we're gonna wrap up with a quick shakedown here. So let's start with you, David. We're gonna come down. What is one thing? It doesn't have to be in the bill or anything we've seen. What's the piece of funding that you would hope the federal government could do more of? To advance equity in infrastructure projects? Is it community organizing work? Is it
affordable housing?
Affordable housing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Same question. We're going to come down the line because we're coming down the end here. Mayor, what's your one thing to make infrastructure more equitable and more the benefits more widely shared than it has been before? Yeah, what does the federal government do?
Well, I have to agree with David, and we have just made a historic investment in housing affordability and all the way up to so-called middle class, right? Not anymore middle class, because people just can't afford to live here. And I know it's a national phenomenon, but we're constrained by the ocean, the Everglades. We have to build densely. We have to do it on transportation corridors because people should use public transit, not have to burn dirty car fuel. Of course, electrification, also good. But we truly have just done something unprecedented with an additional, $85 million investing in a range of programs, everything from renovation to maintain affordability to subsidy of landlords to bring prices down to affordable levels, to eviction prevention, which we've been very good at. So a whole range of programs that we hope will really turn the tide because we are really losing our workforce, we're losing our families.
And yeah. And just to be clear, you're both saying more affordable housing would make infrastructure projects and spending more equitable because of what you're saying, having it located on transit corridors densely, yeah.
Right, I mean, it's social engineering. Terry talked about the people that are going to be displaced, the homeless people from under the highway. Well, what should we be doing? We should be doing like Finland, building them housing, right? We shouldn't just be looking for some other social service program. We should be, and I'm a social worker, right? We should be providing basic infrastructure, which is housing, and that will turn the tide for everything.
Terry, wrap us up here.
Yeah. I would like much more equitable economic development to focus on Black-owned businesses and bringing more jobs and businesses to our community. I do support the focus on housing, which is key. But if you don't have a job, it's really difficult to pay for any housing. And if you're also not in a job that gives you a future, a career, then you're just, sort of spending money to, paycheck to paycheck. So I would say, particularly in the Black community, we need much more economic engines. And so whether that's the financing of, places for businesses to congregate, whether that's financing public transportation so people can get to work, whether that's financing disparity studies so that we can prove that, we need to have more equitable economic development in our community. Those are the things that I would push for.
Yeah, that's great. And I learned another thing I learned today One day of filming a music video in Overtown basically paid the rent for 50 families. Just one day of filming a music video.
Wow.
So, Chris, I guess the question is, when is the next time you'll be having lunch with Secretary Fudge
Or Secretary Buttigieg?
Buttigieg we're having? Yeah.
I think I'll see them all tomorrow. I'll see Secretary Buttigieg tomorrow. If I get on this flight in like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
But I will just
We'll
say,
close this out here. Yeah, please.
I'll just close out to say, it's an exciting time. But one of the things that you hear are the key ingredients of creating a thriving community. Good community engagement, understanding of where we're trying to go, affordable and attainable housing, opportunity for anyone, regardless of their background, their race, their creed, to actually have not only a good paying job, but an opportunity to start a business and actually maybe transfer that business and a generational wealth for years to come. And from where I sit, to actually think that we can actually have a country that is by far still one of the best country in the world, but also do it in a way where it's actually a leader in some of the issues that we talked about when it comes to economic resiliency, prosperity for all, climate resiliency, as well as equitable distribution of opportunity. Here's the thing though. We actually have examples of how to do that today across the country. We have great mayors, we have great innovators. So my question is not, what is the thing? The moment is, are we going to get the thing done? And recognizing that for those communities that are now on that first wave, who are getting those grants, it's going to be the measurement of, did we do it right? Because that is how we rebuild trust. If we're fixing the problems, if we are being truthful and transparent, then we as a country, remember, we as a country came together and made this historic investment. It's nothing to say we can't do it again unless we do it right. And so from our perspective, that is our hope. And I'll just end with one other thing that might not have gotten elevated before, which I think is transformative. Is that for the first time at the Department of Transportation, but with our sister agencies, we are beginning to actually use data to quantify these efforts through our Justice 40 initiative, which first was the idea of, okay, let's identify our priority communities that we want to invest in. Because this new investment, we want to make sure we prioritize. But now we're asking a fundamental question. When we are making investments, it's not the dollar that goes into, let's say, Overton or into Thomasville, Georgia, in a rural town or somewhere in the Midwest. The question is, are we creating benefit and value? And through data, we then all can have a common hymnal where we know where we're all singing from. And we also can say, together, what are the trade-offs that we need to make today? And what investments we can make for the future. And that, my friends, as someone who's been on the ground working with communities, that is what's been missing. Being at the table, having the shared language and knowledge of data, and the ability for all of us together to say, here are the trade-offs. Some of us are going to get what we need today, but we're going to get everything else tomorrow. And those are the conversations that are happening at our dinner room tables every day. But now we can do this as a country. That is what's most exciting about this moment. And I welcome all of you on this journey with us to get this done. Thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone. And thanks to our panelists in the High Line. And I think we're wrapping up here. Again, thank you, Christopher, Terry, Mayor Daniela, David. Great to be with you all. And that's a wrap.